I agree with a great deal of what you've said, but most of the analysis at the end had been done before. I'm glad you've repeated it in a report called The Northern Way, by the same people who are involved in the powerhouse argument now as was then, Richard Leese being a classic example of one of those. And really, what I want to do is register what is my particular interest now for what, about 30-odd years, that of the regional dimension. And in fact, the analysis is really about local government reform. Quite proper, quite needed, though it's not one model suits everything. What's in Manchester is quite different to what's in Sheffield, and what is different in the other areas is now being negotiated, and we don't know whether it'll all be completed by that period of the, presumably the public expenditure, when he announces how much money should be available. So I open up by saying the Northern Powerhouse question, is it a southern idea or indeed a northern vision? It's certainly been a vision in the north that we should have more accountability, more power, more resources to develop the kind of priorities. I think the report, which is an excellent one, not only does the proper analysis of the differences between the north and south and what we have to do with it, it was exactly the same analysis when we did the Northern Way in 2003. What are we going to do about it? There were some marginal changes made in the ones that we produced in reducing some of these. Timetable wasn't sufficient. It was done in 2004. In 4 years, Osborne came along and cancelled it and made clear that he didn't want to do that. He's always been against devolution as the government. They were against Scottish, Welsh, even the London Assembly. They voted constantly against any form of devolved authority. And I think to a certain extent that influences their arguments about what you should be doing in the local authority changes and the Northern Powerhouse, which is a bit of rhetoric, quite frankly, because it's not completely for the north. And one of the difficulties to do it today is its negotiations are still going on. We don't know what the hell's going to happen to Hull, whether we can get to the northern version of the 9 ones they've got for the northern region, or whether we'll be connected with York, with Leeds, that connected. So it's difficult to comment on the final output. But what is true, and I fully accept, and you bring it out in your report, is basically that there needs to be local authority changes, and I think this goes for somewhere, certainly in Manchester, in Devo, that puts extra powers and resources that weren't with the local authorities. But if you go to Sheffield, theirs is an economic version. They don't want that social investment in the health or the social services. They want to do the actual economic development, and indeed they go further in the sense of wishing to extend their boundaries over into Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, which in a sense is not acceptable apparently to them. So there's a lot of controversy going on. And we all know from our history that in fact the controversy is the greatest when it comes to local authority changes. Tell me about it. When I went after that to introduce the North East referendum, the argument wasn't about my failure to get the total powers for the North East, as we were given as a Labour cabinet, to Scotland and Wales. They could see that it really wasn't much more than local government. They felt it was another arm of local government. They'd had the county structure, was then fighting about whether Durham was going to be two unitary authorities. And many of the councils were concerned where they were going to be positioned in that argument. So we didn't get a proper assessment of the regions, largely because we didn't give them enough powers and resources. And in fact, if we could get them like Scotland and Wales, then I think we would have a different regional development. So what I want to argue then is that whilst you are excellent here in making the presentation, the one point that's missing is rejuvenation of democracy is really talked about here in your criteria of local authority. And I hope that does come about. I think local authorities who are negotiating at the moment have a difficult situation because the government say, I'll take it or leave it. But you've got to have a mayor. Okay, I think they've decided now whether somebody might elect them or whoever it might be. But that was a kind of shotgun wedding. We'll make changes as long as you do as we say. And therefore you negotiate and sign. It's difficult for the local authorities. So I have no criticism of local authorities who are looking at a devolved form of central government and very different and not covering all parts of the north, though we wait the final negotiations. So as for powerhouse, to deal with the inequalities and the injustices that exist at the present, pointed out very much in your report, and the suggestions of what we might do about it, my part is that most of the actual slides you showed us are really upon central government decisions. Is that going to be made different by city regions? And by the way, we introduced city regions. That was our concept. Why? I'd lost to the northeast, so we moved on to city regions as a step towards, hopefully, I would find a regional framework in that. So the city regions are important. But you know, when we're looking at those slides, all of them, and in many of the areas we're talking about, it's whether you can get more money from central government, or indeed that many of our inequalities are because it's not sharing out the money fairly between the various regions, and particularly in this case today, the north and south. So whether these city regions or northern powerhouses will be sufficiently strong enough to make a decision with the Chancellor about improving those resources must be debatable. He's already lined that now to the 30 million money, is it 30 million, a billion money that they're going to give over the 5 years. So there's some limit on the resources, and some questions whether the local authorities will be able to deal with all the powers they've got with the kind of limit on money they've got. Though one of the essential questions there is, should they have tax-raising powers? They gave them to Scotland, they gave it to Wales. I was involved in the negotiations on that. Of course, they didn't use them. Nobody likes to increase tax powers, but it means you then raise some of the resources that you have control of, not central government, to invest in the various areas of social justice, of transport. Transport's classic as well, if you look at it. If you look at the Transport North, I think it is called One North, isn't it? Can't keep up with all the ruddy titles. But One North produced a report, and you mentioned about the Pennine Way, right? It stopped on the Pennines. The way it is at the moment, there'll be the War of the Bloody Roses unless we get a proper northern transport policy. But on that case in the north, the One North actually can only take it as far as the authorities, which are still based on the areas of responsibilities and counties and areas of coverage in the boundaries of the authorities. So to that extent, they've had to set up another body, right, which is now going to have people like Hull and others on it, not in the same way as the other people that form Transport North, but you can be consulted with. That is not a northern strategy. And in fact, I don't think the resources were held back because we didn't have the technicians. It was because the choice was made to pour the money into the actual Western train system because they'd failed totally to estimate properly central government. What they estimated would be the cost at about 680 million became 1.3 billion. And they just, after promising us, admittedly before the election, that this is the programme for the Trans-Pennine, sorry, we haven't got the money. It's not the technicians, it's the priorities. And therefore the issue for us, if you believe that the priorities in the relationship between local government and central government is dependent on when central government recognise you as an influence. And quite frankly, I think what's going to happen out of the local government ones that we're talking about, the reform, is really going to be one of competition, not cooperation. Each one of them will be wanting to achieve all that you have in the criteria. And in some cases, there will be conflicts between them. It's inevitable. That conflict will be turned into the local kind of council wars that go on at present. God, blimey, you can't get Hull to talk to Grimsby, never mind talking about a coordinated problem. And that's not just limited in the Humber side. So, look, the emphasis is competition, because each city region then will go for the criteria that you set out for it. There will be some consequences for the rest of other areas or the region itself. You need to have priorities about resources done in a regional sense, not the strength of the local government. I think with all these coordinated agreements, I'm bound to say that Manchester's going to be the biggest influence, isn't it? Manchester is the London, really, of the North. And I think that's basically as they see it. And they will be the big influence, talking to Osborne and the Chancellor in allocation of resources. So there is a real problem here. Now, I don't want to be here today, and I've got a number of criticisms about the local government thing. But first of all, local government leaders have had to deal with the government for the next 5 years of what are going to be their resources for their people. I can't be critical of that. They get the best deal they can, though it's a bit of a shotgun wedding because certain conditions are laid down about it, and we'll have to see how that works out, even the election of the mayor's example. Though in those circumstances, we do have some example that come out in your there, the London Assembly. He scrapped all the assemblies we had for the regions and the RDAs in the Northern Way when he came in. I wrote to him actually and pointed out that he was a Northern MP. Shouldn't he be thinking about North? Could I offer him the Northern Way? And I sent it to him. He came back and he said, nice, thank you very much, but it's got a flaw. And I couldn't find out what the flaw was, but what he did give us is this powerhouse argument, really. And the flaw is it hasn't got a regional dimension. So whilst I think you've done an excellent report, and the second one's good, it's built on the first analysis, exactly what we do want, so I do congratulate you on that, and coming together to think. But what we're in is in an era of change, aren't we? An era of change, where things are coming along. So it provides us with an opportunity of saying, what is the local government structure that we're to have, and how does it fit in? The one missing link is the regional part. The Transport North, the One North, showed, in fact, that basically you needed something that covered all the regions, from Newcastle right down to Merseyside. And all of them have the difficulties of getting the required coordinations. So if I say there's competition, it really is within them coordinated areas. If you go to Newcastle and you go to those areas, or even in Humber, there is some great deal amount of tensions, which 5 years may not be enough time to deal with all those problems, but it will be there. But I welcome the fact, the era of debate. My argument then is, please, in the consideration, when you're talking about rejuvenating democracy, about getting power to actually greater resources to deal with these injustices and inequalities, as indeed was pointed out in your education. It made me smile a bit because my education was in Brinsworth, Rotherham, where I failed my 11 plus, and they're bringing that again now, how many years, 60 years later. So they are issues, but they want a powerful voice. Local authorities, or even this reform one, will be, but without having a regional one that can have some decision, and transport's a classic example. You can't just bring it up to Leeds on a Pennine and hope it'll get to Newcastle, or make a decision whether it go to Newcastle or Hull, and if you look at the roots of that, that's quite important. So to that extent, there needs to be a regional dimension to it. And so when I wave around my own report, which was in 2004, he has scrapped it, and has now come back. The one fundamental difference, and the analysis is the same about all the problems, the one fundamental difference, they do not want regional aspect. What does regional aspect mean? It means one powerful voice. That's what's happened in Scotland, which they opposed. That's what's happened in Wales, which they opposed. It's happened in London. It comes up on all your statistics there with their own assembly and elected mayor. But they just will not give that to English regions. What do they offer as an alternative? An English parliament with English MPs voting on English legislation. Well, I'll tell you what, that means a parliament dominated by the South, which will be making the decisions, because that's where heavyweight is, and making their decisions against the North. They won't be sympathetic to do those things, and we have to have one voice, a northern voice that achieves that. Now, I put to you that I believe, and those who have had the experience of the regional development agencies I set up, did achieve a great deal of movement, not as much as we could, but it did coordinate the priorities, it did actually determine the priorities in the areas we're talking about. And I believe there would have been a different force dealing with the steel situation in Redcar and Scunthorpe as two examples. That was an area where we needed industrial strategy, not to ask the government, are you talking to Europe and can you have a strategy? We need to have what that strategy is. For example, the HS2, who decides where that goes? Government. It should start in the north. We shouldn't wait till the 2030s before it can get up here and we can invest in the HS3. There's so many delays in London, quite frankly, at present. Delays, cost, time. The cost now is on 2011 prices. I'll give you a prediction. Old Osborne will find, well, let's delay a little bit on the starting in the south. I hope, well, don't give it up. Start it in the north there, connect it to the HS3, none of the 250-mile daft 200 HS3 argument. Connectivity, more than the speed, put that together, and then start ordering the steel now for our steel industry within those contracts. I see the government now talking they might do it for HS2. You have to have an industrial strategy. We'll not get it from a government, it doesn't believe in it. So we have to develop our own, and that's why a regional concept is critical. And when I say region, I don't mean just the three I had, I'm quite prepared to happy that, but they have to act together, not just three mayors from the area sitting down and say how we're going to do it. Regional development agencies that look at the northern strategy. That strategy is outlined in here in 2004, and they started on it, except it got scrapped. So if you look at the strategies we need a northern voice. So my claim today is, think about the regional dimension. Don't argue whether you should have elections and assemblies and things like that. There are people who've got strong views about. But we need a bodies that determine what those regional priorities. To be thinking what's needed for our northern region. That's what they do in Scotland. That's what they do in Wales. And when I was given the job to look at regional policy, after the failure in Scotland and Wales in a referendum as the North East, they had a second one, they said they'd have it. I said the English regions need the same powers and the same resources. So if you want a powerhouse of the North, you better look at its regional dimensions, putting it all together. We have great assets. We need to make them stronger, as we say, with skill. But unless you get the government to take account that we're a powerful voice to be taken to account, if you don't do that by setting up one Yorkshire voice, a northern voice for the whole area, and pressure government to get the resources and powers, which Scotland and Wales and London have been doing every day of the ruddy week, while we sit there and moan. Wake up. We need a northern voice. Get together, show the guts, and let the government know. They can't just say, well, we haven't got an industrial policy, we can't do anything. Well, you better find one, because we're going to find one. So let's get a strong northern voice to do it. Add that to your divisions and add that to the discussions about the regional area, and then we really will have a northern powerhouse rather than the collection which they do in rhetoric and don't believe in. It really isn't about a northern powerhouse. It's all about northern votes. Thanks.